Good evening, everybody. I'm going to talk to you about innovation, but more importantly, how innovation occurs. And I'm going to take you on a rambling journey through my life and use examples of how I come up with stuff. But one of the most important determinants on any innovation is that you need to be customer-centric and not product-centric. Because if you're not, you end up making products that nobody wants. So you actually have to start at being customer-centric. So being customer-centric in the context of this talk, can I just get a show of hands who had heard of Ray Avery before this event? Just a show of hands. So that's like 67.25%. Must try harder in the media communication stakes. Len Brown's doing a much better job. But to give you a kind of handle on why it's complicated being slightly famous is I was driving to the airport the other day, and I always get a corporate cab because I can sit in the back of the corporate cab and text people and get on with my life. And I was picked up by this nice Indian corporate cab driver who was going to drive me off to the airport. And as soon as I got in, I sensed that he recognised me and he wanted to know, just to confirm who I was. So I put my hand up because I was texting. And this is no mean feat for me because I'm dyslexic, even though I have no idea what I'm sending. And one of the reasons I'm texting is because I know that I've got approximately 4,785 days left to live. And so I want to multitask and try and turn those days into at least 10 or 12,000 days. One of the amazing things about us as a species is that we're born with 30,000 days. That's all there is in the till, 30,000 days. If you were starting a business and you were smart, you would actually have a strategic plan for growing that business, and you'd have an exit strategy. How are you going to turn it over, license the whole thing to a multinational? We do none of that in our real life. Your exit strategy is going to be the same as mine. You're going to be bloody dying. It's going to be a big bloody surprise for most of you. It won't for me because I'm reverse engineering my life. And I implore you, if you want to sail around the South Pacific when you're 60 years old, you need to have a plan for it now. And what I can guarantee is if you do have a plan, you will be smarter than the average bunny, because even if you don't succeed on all of the benchmarks that you set, you'll be further ahead because you have a plan and you try for that plan. Every day at the end of the day, I do an audit about how successful I've been against my life plan. And so I'm actually much more productive than the average person. So there I am texting away in the back of the cab, and then the phone went, and it was a guy from Nepal about a factory we have there and a production problem, and I had to take the call. And this Indian corporate cab driver was getting more and more agitated, and finally cracked just about the airport Oaks, and he said, "I'm terribly sorry, sir, I have to interrupt. But I have to ask." And I went, "Hang on a minute." I cleared the call, and I went, "Well, I'm Sir Ray Avery. You may have seen one of the documentaries on my work that I've done through Africa and Asia in blindness prevention, where we've developed technology to restore the sight so far to 16 million people with low-cost intraocular lenses. By year 2020, there will be some 30 million people. You may have read my autobiography, Rebel with a Cause, which is in its 7th reprint, which is a huge bestseller in New Zealand land. You may have noted that I was made a Knight Grand Companion in 2010, which is the highest knighthood you can get in the land. And of course, in 2011, I was voted the most trustworthy person in New Zealand. He said, "Actually, sir, I just want to know if you want international or domestic." So being slightly famous isn't all it's cracked up to be. But one of the key determinants, one of the really root determinants of successful innovation is actually observation. Observation is the key to innovation. And most of us are walking around with our eyes closed. We don't see everything that's before us. And most of the big disruptive technologies that occur in the world occur because of one person having one singular moment of observation. And usually that person is not what we call practiced in the art. They're not a professional person. A good example would be the 4-stroke petrol engine. Was it invented by Chrysler or Ford? No. It was our good old friend Klaus Otto. It was a coffee and sugar salesman. And he was walking around collecting coffee, from different factories, and he saw a two-stroke motor puffing away and belching out oil, which made the coffee smell terrible. And he thought, I need to get rid of the oil, I'll fix it. And he was a self-trained engineer. He went home and invented the four-stroke petrol engine, which changed the way that we get around. What's the difference between innovation? That was really an innovation. He innovated something that existed. Innovation is somebody sitting on the side of the beach seeing a yacht go by with a sail on it, and then seeing a guy on a surfboard and saying, what if I put that sail on that surfboard? That's just innovation. But disruptive technology changes an existing technology forever. And that would be something as simple as sat-nav. It changed the way we get around. Remember we used to have those in the boot of the car, we used to have all these maps that had coffee stains on them, and you had arguments with your wife about where the hell are we? And now we've got sat-navs, and they're much more complex and simple to use in terms of the data they give us. So disruptive technology changes everything. But you've got to be awake to the idea of the idea. And I was blessed because I was brought up in post-war Britain, brought up in orphanages because my parents didn't like each other much and they didn't like me much, so they put me into orphanages. And I spent the first 14 years of my life in orphanages and halfway houses. And at school wasn't really crash hot because I was short-sighted and nobody tested me for glasses, so I couldn't see the board. And then, of course, I had acute glue ear, so I couldn't hear what they were saying. So there's this mad play going on at the front of the stage. You know, I had no idea what they were doing up there. And they just thought I was dumb because every time they asked me something, I had no idea what they were doing. So they just, in the end, stopped talking to me and left me at the back, you know. And this was brilliant because the only thing I had was the power of observation. And I can be in any country in the world across a room and know the demeanour and what somebody's thinking almost by their mannerisms, their shoulders and how they angle things, because that's how I learnt to imbibe information. And you need to know it too. And if you know how customers imbibe information, you can communicate with them better. So you can do that through observation. And I learnt my observation. The orphanages were terrible places. There was a lot of brutality, Lord of the Flies. There was abuse from the caregivers. And so my solution to that was to run away. And I'd run away for a week. Then I'd get enough stock for a lot of food to run away for a month, and then 6 months. And finally I ran away at the age of about 13 and lived under a railway bridge in London. And it was brilliant because my life started. I went to the Tate Art Gallery and started studying paintings and seeing how paintings were constructed. I went to the Science Museum. And of course, I had 3 paper rounds. One I did in the morning, one I did in the evening, and one I subcontracted to one of my school chums. And so I was cash rich. You know, I actually had a lovely life under the railway bridge. I had my own light switch, which was a torch, and I could do what I wanted to do. I'd go to the large hotels and have tea, morning tea, you know, because all I had to do was put on my school uniform and I could get in there. And so the powers of observation made me a good marketer, you know, so I could actually get out into the world and start understanding how people communicate and understand each other. And that was brilliant, and it could have gone on. There were some difficulties, of course, and that were that I didn't have any parental guidance and had no concept of human condition, particularly around male-female relationships. In fact, my only touchstones were the magazines that I was distributing, and they were the 1953 version of Women's Own and Playboy magazine, you know. So obviously I was a bit screwed up in the head department about what was really going on with male-female relationships. But anyway, I was climbing up to my little posse underneath the railway bridge and I cut my leg and it got infected, and I woke up in hospital with acute blood poisoning. And the guy sitting opposite me was a guy called Jack Wise, who was a teacher. And he said, look, you run away so many times, we're going to have to send you to Borstal. Or you can come round to southern England with me and go into an agricultural research establishment as an intern. It's like Borstal with grass. And I said, I'll do that one. And then my life changed because these were all run by career academics. They were people, lords of the land. They had been Battle of Britain pilots. They had bow ties, smoked Balkan Brigani tobacco, and knew the best champagne. And they looked at me and said, good Lord, Ray, you can't talk properly. No idea what breed water or its wine. We're going to have to educate you. And they did. If you go into my autobiography, you'll see me sitting cross-legged the first year on the ground with the girls, not knowing what to do. And then 4 years later, I went back with an Italian suit on, handmade shoes, and a great vocabulary. And that vocabulary was important to get into business, the businesses that I started, because if you go to hunt bulls in England, they say 3 things to you. Who are you? Where are you from? What you do? And Lord Norfolk is famous for saying Norfolk, 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 because he owned all of Norfolk, you know. And I'd go to these hunt bulls with these guys and get educated. So I could go and sell my laboratory services that I developed to a whole range of people and started a multi-million-dollar business. And that was great. But again, in terms of what you want out of life, my ambition at that stage, when I was about 18 years old, was, and I started my first business, was to have as much money as I could put together, because being rich would make me acceptable in society. And the other one was to be loved. And if you've never had love in your life, you want to be loved. And preferably to be loved by as many women as possible. And of course, the next decade and a half, I gave it a good crack. And these years were the years that my wife refers to as my Tiger Woods years, which I think is a bit unkind. They were actually my years of due diligence. And there was a lot of due diligence going on. And the truth was, of course, that I did want to be loved. And so I kept adding to this posse of women. You couldn't do it today because it's like Tiger Woods, you get busted. But in those days, you could have a posse of women in London, one set in Canterbury, which was where one of my laboratories was, and one in Dover. And they were quite separate. And you could keep these ecosystems separate. And I was very good at social marketing and being customer-centric. So if I was picking up a girl from Knightsbridge who wanted to be taken out in a flash car, I'd pick her up in my E-Type Jaguar, with a bottle of Bolly in the boot with some big bouquet of flowers, and she'd end up at this Italian restaurant at some point in the week. And then if it was a flower power child from the 60s who would think that was all too flash, I'd pick her up in my antique MGA. There'd be a small posy of flowers, a nice Riesling, and she'd end up at the same Italian restaurant at some point in the week. And when the door opened, the maitre d' would say, "Sir, this is the most attractive woman you've ever brought here." And this is marketing, social marketing. So it's got at every level. You have to be involved in social marketing. But of course, this couldn't go on indefinitely. It was just bloody tiring. And I'm talking about the travel. And fortunately for me, I came off my motorbike on a winter road and smashed every single bone in the left-hand side of my body. Somebody put a roundabout in the middle of the road when it wasn't one when I went to work. And I came round the bend and smashed into it, and I broke every single bone in the left-hand side of my body. Tibia, fibula, the whole lot. I was in hospital like that. I was in hospital with pins like this for 6 weeks. That's enough time for all those women to find you. At the same time. They weren't happy. I left for New Zealand, and I didn't really leave to go to New Zealand because of that. I left England because it wasn't making me into the person that I wanted to be. And all the things that I thought would make me happy didn't make me happy. And I had started innovating things. I'd started a company that was the first company in southern England and possibly the world to make nitrogen sparge chips. You know, if you go to a chip shop, you get a bag of chips delivered by somebody. And what I did was I bought this agricultural research college. We were growing plants and potatoes, so I thought, I was working in a chip shop part-time, so I thought, it used to take us half the day to cut up the chips, so I thought, if I can chop up those chips and put them into bags and deliver them to these guys, this is a value-added product, save them time, we can make a killing. And that went brilliantly until about on the route to deliver these. By about the last deliveries we're doing, they started to turn brown. So off to the library, oxidation, liberated some nitrogen cylinders from the physics laboratory, and we were in. And we started a business. And I managed to turn over that business. I was about 15 when I had my first business and sold it for a few $100,000 because we had a distribution chain set up, we bought potato washing machines. This was all done at school. So you have to back yourself in these things, but you have to have that one moment of innovation where you see an ecological niche that's a very customer-centric product, not just thinking of a product. Why companies go bust, like Eastman Kodak went bust, because they didn't make the transition between emulsion technology and digital film. They kept trying to sell the same thing, and it went through the whole labyrinth of all their products, through their photocopy machines and so on, and they didn't listen to their customers. They invented digital film in 1957. They invented digital technology, didn't do anything with it, didn't listen to their customers. So you have to keep listening to your customers at every stage in the process. Anyway, I arrived up in New Zealand in 1973, and the moment I stepped onto the land of the long white cloud, I found home. Because this was a can-do country, not like the country I left behind. And within the next few weeks, I became a Kiwi. I was indoctrinated into what makes a Kiwi a Kiwi. And again, through observation, most people don't know who we are. If you're born in New Zealand, you don't do any self-analysis. You just accept you're Kiwi, whatever. But I arrived at 4 o'clock in the morning because your air traffic controllers were on strike again on an unscheduled flight. And I walked through the international arrivals terminal, and there were all these birds flying around, and they were popping on the tables. And down below were 4 guys with one dries on with air rifles shooting them. I thought, this is the country for me. Got a vermin problem, you shoot the buggers. Very pragmatic. And it got better because the guy that I met on the plane was a guy coming back from Europe on a sales trip, and he had 2 rather large suitcases. And this was my first real big nomenclature problem, because he said, look, Mum's meeting us at the airport and she'll take us home and we'll show you around in the morning. Now in England, your mum is your mother, that's the end of the story. But in New Zealand, of course, your mum can be your wife. So when he got to the curb and started pashing this woman who looked old enough to be his sister, I thought, hello, there's a bit of Julian banjos going on in New Zealand land. They're not completely normal. And it got worse, because in the back of this little 850 Mini that he was going to take me home with his wife, or sister or daughter or whatever she was, and were 2 elderly people. There was his mother and father-in-law who come up from Christchurch. 2 large suitcases, my 2 large rucksacks, camping paraphernalia, him, his wife, and them. I did the maths. You know, at that stage, I'd been educated at some of the best colleges in London. I know about volume, physics, maths. This was not going to happen. There was no way on God's earth this vehicle was going to move off the curb with all of this paraphernalia. Anyway, we're driving on this other motorway, and the old boy's in the front, and he's got one suitcase out like that and holding the other one on the roof, no roof rack. And the young boy's got all of the paraphernalia and the camping stuff wrapped around, and I'm in the back with the girls like a Malteser with all this other luggage. And that's when I knew, within an hour arrival in New Zealand, impossible is just a starting point for Kiwis. And I can say, hand on heart, none of the things I've done on the world stage, building laboratories in desperate countries and bringing down the cost of medical products, would have happened if I hadn't come to New Zealand. Because New Zealanders has something that nobody else has. And we were trying to understand what that was. And as a scientist, I published this book called The Power of Us. And I implore you to go and read it. It's got 53 New Zealanders in it. And what we were trying to understand was, what makes us different? Have we got this innate innovation ideology? Is it because we're better at observing things, or do we just tinker with things, or do we have some psychological thing? And my answer to that really was what happened to me in the first weeks of arrival. I arrived and I'd sold all my businesses, and I had a few £1 million, which at those days was 5 times as many New Zealand dollars, so I could afford to do nothing pretty much. So house prices were doubling overnight, so I bought a few houses around Mount Eden. Just went along, I'll buy that one. And one of them was a big villa on the side of Mount Eden, and it had a big lava flow going through the basement, which occupied half the basement. And I thought, if I could dig that out, I could have a 4-car garage and enhance the value of the property. So not knowing about anything about geology, I went down and got a Kango hammer, a little 850-watt Kango hammer, and I drilled it into the mountain. If you've ever done that, you'll know it goes in really easily past the hearse where you can separate the tool from the motor. And it jams itself in the mountain. And now you're paying $7 a day for a sculpture. So if you're a scientist, you go and get the 1800-watt version. And you drill that in, and it becomes a sister sculpture. You're now paying $18 a day for these sculptures. And the issue has changed completely. It's not about drilling out the basement. It's how you're going to get these tools back to this guy down the road. And fortunately for me, a Kiwi came across. He was 78 years old, and he had a cigarette in his mouth that he could smoke, and looked like he had been smoking it since the Boer War. And he came over with his slippers on, and he said, "What are you trying to do?" So I'm trying to dig out the basement, put in a 4-car garage. You won't do it like that, mate. I said, I know. Now I know. Go and look at my place. We go across to his place, and it's like somebody got a square of butter and took the whole mountain away. The whole square of the mountain's gone, removed. Just a little bit of damp, no reinforcing. I said, that's brilliant. That's exactly what I want to do. How'd you do that? Dynamite. What? He said, I'll do your place. And he did. It turned out he used to be the chief dynamiter at the Thames gold mine, retired, deaf as a post. And then he came across a few weeks later and he said, you've got a great view of Mount Eden over there. Just need to get rid of that macrocarpa. And I said, I haven't got a chainsaw. He said, I have. Because he used to work in forestry before he was in the mines. And he produced this chainsaw that was about a foot longer than him, hadn't been started since the Boer War. And it finally started into life after about an hour, and all this two-stroke smoke was coming out, and the blade hadn't been changed for 100 years, so it was actually lacerating the tree. However, with all that smoke, and he had a rope around the top, which he told me to pull at the right time. And I was holding onto this rope, and suddenly there's a twisting, cracking sound, and he goes, run! And I woke up with this guy standing under me with his fag glowing, the two-stroke motor ripping away, and he said, don't worry, mate, I'll cut you out. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what is the Kiwi spirit. Absolutely no respect for the status quo, and not fond of rules and things like that. I used to say this, really did used to say this, I used to love telling this story to Len Brown, but of course now it's gone to shit. Because we built things without any permits and so on. But it is that freedom of alacrity that we have in New Zealand that is perhaps the derivative of why you can invent stuff. And if we look at how things are invented, if you think about something like your microwave oven, you might think that was invented by a whole bunch of people going into the laboratory to make something to heat up your evening meal. And this is the importance of you. You know stuff about your business that if you can actually see the interstices of the customer needs, you can get some software around that and make a huge killing in this business. You just have to think about what the customer really is asking and be aware of that. And so that observation thing is critical. So the microwave oven was invented by a scientist called Percy, and good old Percy was trying to stop the German submarines coming up the English Channel. And he developed a thing called a magnetron which sent microwave signals up the English Channel, huge thing. And you've got one in your microwave, a little tiny magnetron, and we put it into a shielded area because if you get it out in the real world, it causes anything with water in it and water molecules to vibrate. The water molecules vibrate so quickly that they get hot, create friction, and heat up your evening meal. And so that's what good old Percy noticed. He was sending these microwaves up the English Channel, and the Hershey bar in his pocket started to melt. He thought, hello, if I could put this into a box, I could make something to heat up your evening meal. God knows what he was doing to poor old Percy's testicles at the same time. But observation is the key to innovation. All the things I've invented have come about through that one moment of innovation. In this book are 53 people who are at the head of the class in terms of the areas that they work. And we don't know much about them. And this is one of the problems we have as New Zealanders, is we actually need to start taking ownership of the ideology of who we are and why we can do things that nobody else can do. So Peter Beck, in a show of hands, Peter Beck, who's heard of Peter Beck? All right, probably 0.5% or 1% best. He was a scientist. Well, he's not a scientist, actually. He's a young man under the age of 40. He went down to Hauraki Gulf and put a rocket into interstellar space with a bit of funding from Michael Fay. And as a result of that, he was testing the payload for how fast he could get the rocket. He's got a hybrid system of a solid and liquid fuel that's better payload than anything NASA could come up with. And he did it through observation and playing. But he did it because he could. And that's really the subtext of this book. We can do things in New Zealand that you can't do anywhere else in the world. You can't do this in America. NASA wouldn't allow you to put a rocket into interstellar space. And you can't do it in Australia because the air traffic controllers would be around with tracker dogs wondering about where it's going to land. We've no bloody idea where it's landed because that wasn't the purpose of the exercise. It was actually just seeing how fast it would go. And so that's a good example. We've got Bill Buckley. Who's heard of Bill Buckley? Probably only 7%. Every single person in this room has been touched by Bill Buckley. Bill Buckley's company, Buckley Engineering, makes 90% of the world's electromagnets that go to activate the chips that are in your flat screen TV and your mobile phone. It's not a company in Silicon Valley. It's a South Auckland company with a guy that supports Speedway and has got an Aston Martin that he can't drive because he's got too many speeding tickets and his wife drives him to work. That's because he's a Kiwi. He's got no respect for the status quo. And somebody came to him and said, I want to build the world's biggest electromagnet. Can you have a go? And he went, OK, because he was a Kiwi. And that's what makes us different, is this ability to dream, without any reservations at all. And what we're bad at, though, is recognising that. And if you want to know how powerful that one moment of innovation can be, I'll give you a good example. Who's heard of Colin Murdoch? Colin Murdoch? Nobody. OK. Every single person in this room has been touched by Colin Murdoch. He was a pharmacist from Timaru, not practiced in the art of making medical devices, but he was writing a shopping list for his wife one day, and the Bic pen he had stopped working. So he pulled it apart and found that little bit of tubing in there, the plastic tubing, and he put some matchsticks that he sharpened down the end to get the last bit of ink out so he could finish writing the list. While he was doing that, he had that one moment of observation, and he went into the garage, fired up the lathe. When I'm telling this story in America, I say every Kiwi's got a lathe in the garage. Fired up the lathe, and he invented the world's first plastic disposable hypodermic syringe, which changed global healthcare. Before that, we were washing out glass syringes. In 1953, we used to get glass syringes, wash them out, and fill them up with the next set of chemicals. In fact, when I was at school in 1953, I had my polio injection, not only with the same glass syringe as everybody else, there would have been about 150 of us lined up, but also with the same needle. And I was bloody glad my name was Avery. I was right at the front of the queue. I've got two daughters called Amelia and Anastasia, because these things stay with you. But here we have one guy who changed the world through one single moment of observation. And that's a good example of disruptive technology. Before plastic disposable hypodermic syringes, we couldn't do global vaccinations because you had to have a whole company set up in a different country to wash and clean out these devices and sterilise them. So every single person in this room has got an opportunity to think about disruptive technology and come up with something that nobody else has ever thought of. You've just got to be awake to the idea of ideas. And we do that all the time. The tagline in this book is, New Zealanders who dare to dream. And what New Zealand did for me was allow me to be the person that I wanted to be. And I couldn't be that person in the UK because there have been too many restrictions. We have so much alacrity in our country. There's no other country in the world where you can change the road rules at a weekend and get away with it. You try doing a right-hand change in America or Italy or France and you get strung up. But we just say, OK, shit. What we do with rules, if we don't like rules, we tend to just ignore them. And so I want you to think about your opportunity as an organisation, as a company, to come up. I'll give you a good example of how that can happen and how it can be a game changer and how much opportunity we have. I developed a low-cost infant incubator which cost about $2,000 versus $30,000. And I needed to monitor the kids' biometric signs inside the incubator cheaply. Normally you have a big LED screen, you send all the data up with electrodes that are connected to the baby. In developing countries they can't afford that. So I developed a little wrist strap which sends biometric data to your mobile phone. And we can track your heart rate, blood oxygen concentration, and movement and temperature anywhere. And I was Wales-rising about that, and this is what happens in New Zealand. I was Wales-rising about that at an ACC conference. And a guy in the audience was a guy called Lee Short, and he heads up St John's, he's a board member. And he said, we've got a huge need for this technology because we've got all these little old ladies in rest homes and they've got a little band thing around here with a button on it, which is a panic button. And if they think they're going to faint, they push it. And then, of course, they don't faint, and the ambulance comes, and they have a cup of tea with the ambulance driver, and we're hemorrhaging $15 million a year because of these false call-outs. Now, with your technology, we can actually know what's going on and make a much more informed decision about whether to send a car or just talk this woman down because she's been in the garden doing some gardening and her heart rate's up. And so that technology will change the whole, what we call PERS market. And it came out through just seeing the opportunity to do something. And the technology that was, the actual software was written by 4 university students who walked into my office with another application. And I said to them, if you can go away and write an application for St. John's, I'll give you a shareholding in the company. And they went off on, I think, Thursday afternoon, and by Monday they came back and said, done it. And that's exactly what's on this phone. And that's the depth of intelligentsia that we have in New Zealand. So the 2 messages here are that everybody can make a difference. Every single one in this room can come up with some smart idea. You don't have to be practiced in the art, you just have to see things. One of the nutritional products that I developed, which is a game-changing product which gets good protein into kids in developing country, came from watching a Maori guy squeeze kiwi fruit onto a steak. And if you've never done that and you've got a rubbish bit of steak, get some kiwi fruit and squeeze it on it. Because in kiwi fruit is an actinase enzyme which dissolves proteins. In fact, if you get a whole chook and put it in a bucket of kiwi fruit for a week and pull it out, it's like a Boris Karloff movie. There's nothing left, just bones. And people who used to pack kiwi fruits had no fingerprints, used to dissolve. So seeing those things, I knew that there was a protease. So we take waste material from the abattoirs, mix it with waste kiwi fruit, and come up with an amino acid complex which breaks down all the big proteins into small amino acids that go straight across the kid's gut. So we've got a multi-million-dollar business as a result of one single moment of observation. So be awake to the idea. When you're driving to work, you're not going to have a moment of observation when you're good old Len's buggered up my whole talk, because I used to say I have shower moments where I come up with ideas, where I have a quiet moment, you're not thinking about anything else. But after reading all the blogs about what goes on in showers, I'm not sure that everybody has the same same backdrop. But you need to find some white space. You need to find some white space to be creative. And most of mine occurs early in the morning before the whole family wakes up, and I'm lying in bed and thinking about things and thinking about... So the power of observation is the key to innovation. And each and every single one of you can improve those powers of observation just by... You can't observe things if you're talking or driving or whatever. So you all know a lot of this, because I'm sure when you're talking with your customers, because you've got a product that you have to make customer-centric in terms of adapting for the customer's needs. But the quicker you understand what the customer really wants, and most of the time they don't know exactly what they want. So you have to understand your customer better than anybody else. But I implore you to read the book and think about your life cycle. I'm ferociously proud to be a Kiwi, because one of the things that makes us different on the world stage is that we have no respect for the status quo. We change things. We propel the human race forwards. And we have absolutely no respect for mediocrity. So go away and think about how you can change the world. I changed the world, but I wouldn't have been able to change the world if I hadn't come to New Zealand. I'm ferociously proud of being a Kiwi, and I hope that you guys are too. Thank you very much.